morning's gospel reading comes from the book of Luke. Today we'll be looking at Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 13. Jesus told his disciples, "There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and he asked him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer.' So the manager said to himself, 'What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses.' So he called in each of his master's debtors. He asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' 900 gallons of olive oil,' he replied. The manager told him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, 'And how much do you owe?' 1,000 bushels of wheat,' he said. He told him, 'Take your bill and make it 800. Now the master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So, if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." This is the word of God for the people of God. Now, I think this is one of those passages that takes a lot of investigation into to fully see what's going on here, what it is that Jesus is really trying to teach. What does a dishonest, shrewd, soon-to-be unemployed manager really have to do with our Christian lives today? Well, this morning I hope I can offer some clarification on this. This parable that Jesus uses here compares a follower of Jesus to a shrewd businessman. Now, people who are very successful in business have at least three major characteristics in common. First, they work very hard. Secondly, they're very smart. And thirdly, they're not afraid to fail. Entrepreneurs know that failure is part of business. They accept failure because they know that they'll learn valuable lessons which can be put into use into their next venture. Entrepreneurs also know that if one doesn't fail on occasion, then you're not really working very hard. Entrepreneurs are always looking for new ways of doing things. They always watch the culture very carefully in order to discover what people really need. And when they find out what people need, they go to work to meet that need. Now, I think that churches and followers of Jesus could learn some things from this business world. Some business practices do indeed have much to teach us as Christians as we do our spiritual thing around here. I think we really ought to pay attention, and Jesus reminds us this morning in this parable. Lloyd Ogilvie who went from being the pastor of First Presbyterian Church in Hollywood, California, to becoming the chaplain of the United States Senate, tells the story of being on a plane one day. Sitting next to him on this cross-country flight was a well-known and very successful industrialist. Ogilvy asked him what was the secret to his success. The response came very quickly: shrewdness. The man said that he spent much of his waking moments thinking, scheming, planning, developing, and putting details together in order to make his company the largest profit possible. Though some of his competitors considered him to be ruthless, he told Ogilvy that he did the very best he could to be honest and fair in everything that he undertook. He was single-minded, and he left nothing to chance. He used all of his energy, all of his intellect and determination to accomplish his goals. Later, Ogilvy reflected on that conversation, and he wondered what would happen if the church and the people of God put the same sort of shrewdness to work for the kingdom. I think that was what Jesus was trying to convey in this morning's parable. The lesson from Luke today, depending on the biblical translation that you're reading from, is a story about a rich man and his servant, or manager, or his steward, who was wasteful, incompetent, dishonest, or shrewd. So we have a rich man. We don't know how he got his riches. Was it from hard work or an inheritance? Was it the product of unscrupulous business practices? We're not really told here in the story, but some of the commentators that I read believe that this fellow was charging interest to his customers, which, by the way, was a violation of Mosaic law. So, there was this rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. He was skimming off the top, apparently. Although, again, some of the commentators that I read suggest that maybe this guy wasn't charging customers what the boss told him to charge because he knew that the prices were too high. But later on in the story, he's called dishonest. So I guess that we have to go along with the notion that this fellow had some kind of character defect. So there's a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this that I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer." So the manager got fired, canned, laid off, downsized, whatever you want to call it. He was done. But apparently, by reading this, this manager received some sort of severance. He wasn't fired right on the spot. He had a few days to get his orders into perspective there. So the manager says to himself, "What do I do now? My master's taken away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm not able to go out and beg because it would be an embarrassment to me. I know what I'll do. When I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." And so he called in the different debtors to his master. And he asked the first one, "How much do you owe?" And he tells him he owes on the olive oil. And he tells him, "Sit down and cut that order in half." And then the second one comes in and he tells him to reduce it by 20%. So we have this out-of-work, middle management executive who's faced with the loss of income. He doesn't know how he's going to feed his family, how he's going to keep his wife in new clothes, how he's going to send the kids off to college, or even how to pay for that sporty new 2-hump camel that he just bought. He had too much pride to become one of those dirty beggars who are lining up the streets. And he has never done a day's worth of manual labor in his life, and he doesn't care to start now. He's in a real predicament. But he's not stupid. So he decides to go to his boss's customers, and he strikes a deal with them. He reduces the olive oil distributor's obligation by 50%. The farmer who was in debt for wheat saw that obligation reduced by 20%. He did this figuring that if he scratched their backs, they would scratch his. He helped them so that they would help him when he needed it. Now, there's a couple possibilities of what's going on here. Either he was subtracting his own commission as a way of reducing those bills, but that would mean that he wasn't dishonest, or the debtors didn't know that he had been fired. If that was the case, then they thought these discounts were legitimate, and they would have been very, very pleased with that. And so the master commends this dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. The end result of all of this is that the rich man comes out smelling like a rose in this. If he had been charging unlawful interest, then his neighbors would praise God that he had finally found salvation. If he were simply a tough-edged business owner, then his debtors would have thanked him for his generosity. Either way, he looked good in this deal. Of course, there was no choice but to praise and commend his manager for his shrewdness, which had ended up paying off a huge dividend. Now, I want to point out here that nowhere in this parable is the dishonesty of the manager lifted up for special acclamation. Nowhere is it suggested that deceitfulness and corruption are commendable courses of action. Nowhere is this fellow praised because he's too lazy or incompetent to change careers in midstream. He was commended for being shrewd. Now, I found it interesting when I looked up in the thesaurus the word shrewd. It came back with different words for it. Words like astute, sharp, on the ball, smart, perceptive, insightful, wise, and clever. Notice that those are all very positive adjectives. So it was this manager's ingenuity that was praised. It is his shrewdness which is admired. Valued is his fierce determination to complete a course of action upon which he has embarked. He set a goal and he reached it. He had a plan and he worked it. He pursued an end with all the creativity and energy that he could muster. So, what does all this say about us as Christians, as followers of Christ? What does it say to us today? Well, we like to say that our Christian faith is the most important part of our lives. We like to say that we intend to live for Jesus each and every day. We like to say that the most important institution in our community is the church. We like to say that it is our Christian faith which provides us guidance and counsel to get us through our day. Am I right on these things? Well, before you answer, be very careful. Think about it for a minute. Do we pursue relationship with Jesus Christ with this very same energy as this dishonest manager? Do we have the same sort of devotion to the cause of Christ as we have for going out and earning our own living? For the dishonest manager, nothing was more important than achieving his goal. Is there anything in our everyday lives which becomes more important, or at least more urgent, than our faith journey? It seems to me that this parable of the dishonest manager ought to give us pause, urge us to take an inventory of the things which occupy our greatest levels of energy. I think it probably ought to make us stop and consider just how much of our prayers, our presence, our gifts, our money, our services, are we really willing to give for the sake of the Lord? If we discover that we're much more willing to devote energies to the things which are not of ultimate consequence, then perhaps we ought to ask ourselves, what are we going to do about it? Are we willing to, if I might borrow a phrase from Oswald Chamber, to give our utmost for our highest? Are we willing to give everything that we have for an encounter with the living Christ? Are we willing to concentrate our energy on meeting Jesus? Jesus wants us to be the children of the light, but he seems to want us to develop some of the shrewdness of the children of this age. Translated for our day, I believe Jesus would like to see us take some of the skill, some of the effort, some of our time and determination that we give to work and apply it to a life in the kingdom of God, or in living a spiritual life. He's not encouraging us to become dishonest like this manager is, but rather to become entrepreneurial about what really matters in our lives. Amen. Please.